as Ronelle said, I'm Sarah Mahadeo. I'm a research fellow at WMU. I like to tell people that I have one foot on land, one foot in the sea, because I have worked and I continue to work a bit both in land use and marine spatial planning, but now I'm primarily doing research on marine spatial planning in the Eastern Caribbean SIDS. So for today's presentation, I will talk a bit about the impacts of climate change and in particular sea level rise on SIDS, and what our response actions might be in the Caribbean SIDS context to those. Contrary to what Ronelle said, I actually won't talk a lot about marine spatial planning, but if that's something you might be interested in hearing, let Ronelle know and she can invite me to another event. So essentially we have sea level rising everywhere, and this is having impacts on the land. So it's making our coastal areas uninhabitable. It's causing flooding, coastal erosion. It's causing our land to be less usable for things like agriculture due to saltwater intrusion. In essence, sea level is rising. It will continue to rise. Global mean sea level is rising the fastest rate that it has in over the last 3,000 years at least. But what we must know that sea level rise, there is regional variability, and this is affected by, for example, ocean dynamics, the melting of land ice, for example. So we must bear that there is a regional variability to the rise. In the Caribbean, sea level rise is actually higher than the global rate. And this is causing us to have extreme storm events, so inundation, flooding, coastal erosion, like I said. And this has particularly negative impacts for us because much of our urban development is on the coast. I think Ronelle pointed out this as one of our governance problems, that we have a lot of development on the coast. And this includes key infrastructure such as ports, seaports and airports, and of course our cities, and much of our population live in coastal areas. So what might we do about sea level rise in the Caribbean? Well, one way is to just allow it to happen, to reach a natural equilibrium, so accommodate and retreat. But for us, this I don't think is quite practical because, like I said, much of what we have in terms of settlement, development, critical infrastructure is on the coast. So I don't think this is going to be politically or practically feasible for us. Another option might be to defend, but I think constructing these sea defenses, hard infrastructure, it causes quite a bit of environmental impacts either along the coast or even within the marine area. Also, it could be quite expensive to construct these. Defending also involves nature-based solutions, so ecosystem-based adaptation, protecting and enhancing our coastal wetlands and mangroves. They can be resilient to the impacts of a changing climate. One example of where mangrove forest has been totally restored is in Union Island and Grenadines. So this area was compromised by a failed marina development, and they have managed through planting more than 3,000 new mangrove plants to totally rehabilitate the area. So by doing these sort of activities, we can, bring back to our coastal areas these natural nature-based solutions to protecting our coastlines. Reefs are another way that we can protect the coast. Reefs grow upwards as water rises, so they are remarkably persistent. The problem, though, is that as in the Caribbean, as in everywhere else, the water is getting warmer, more acidic. With the whole push towards developing ocean economies and the blue economy, we are getting more activity out at sea. So this is more anthropogenic pressure out at sea. It's causing our oceans to change even more. So once that tipping point is reached, I think the reefs are going to be compromised and they can less adapt and provide this function of and the services of protecting our coastlines. Another option would be to advance Singapore style. Singapore has done this over 50 years, where they have added a considerable amount of land space through land reclamation. But how feasible is this for us in the Caribbean? I don't think it is very feasible at all. It's quite expensive. There is considerable environmental impacts related to this, which would be, I guess, unpalatable for us, because much of our small island developing states in particular, and the Eastern Caribbean, they are, heavily dependent on tourism. So anything that negatively impacts a pristine environment would not be an option for us. In terms of policy response options, which I think is what we need to focus on, I already spoke about the nature-based solutions. I think what needs to happen is that we must have a network of protected areas across both land and sea for our critical ecosystems. So think wetlands, mangroves, coral reefs. We must have both land use and marine spatial planning working together to protect these critical ecosystems. We must apply the precautionary approach, also adopt risk reduction measures. And I think climate smart spatial planning is the way of the future for us. We must attempt to include climate change in spatial use scenarios, again, both on land and in sea. So using modeling and mapping tools to do vulnerability and risk analyses. I know this is particularly a challenge though for us in the Caribbean because of data. So data availability in terms of quality, much of the data we have is at the inappropriate resolution, so we are not able to use it for mapping and for modeling. And this is, I know for sure it's a problem for us working in the marine sphere. So I'm not quite sure how you are in the land area, but for us, the first marine spatial plans that have been developed for the Eastern Caribbean so far, they have actually not taken climate change into account because of the lack of data. So just some concluding comments here. Climate change and sea level rise is a problem, not just for SIDS, but for all coastal states. In the Caribbean, we must have science-driven policy making, but we also need to have capacity development in order for this to happen. So particularly capacity development for data collection, use, and management. And I think we need a coordinated approach to how we plan moving forward. So climate smart, adaptive planning across both land and sea. Land use planners need to start talking to those who do ICZM, and of course, marine spatial planning, because everything that happens out at sea has a land-based component to it. And with that, I'll end there. Thank you, and please feel free to contact me if you want to just reach out or you have any questions.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I have lots of questions. Well, I think I will leave my questions for you offline. But really, it's really, I like that you said you have one foot on land and 1 foot in the sea. And of course, as islands in the Caribbean, our entire islands can be considered to be the coastal zone. So what happens on sea really impacts what happens on land, and what happens on land impacts what happens at sea. So again, thank you so much, Sarah, for that presentation.